Per usual, everything on this channel is for educational purposes only and is not intended as financial advice. Today is Wednesday. Let's take a look at some alternative coins. What could go wrong Wednesday? And we've seemingly gathered a barrage of negative headlines, really more so in the altcoin realm than the Bitcoin realm. Bitcoin could care less about most of these headlines. Bitcoin often lumped in with quote-unquote crypto, and nonetheless behaves similarly, especially when, for the most part, everything's still correlated. But it's funny that we have headlines like this. We can't win. Volatility is either too low or too high, and I agree with what they're saying. And what they say lower down in this article from Bloomberg is that you often see lower volatility periods in bear markets. 100% true. You also see higher correlation in bear markets. And like I've said previously, we're not popping off like Nvidia or some other exciting stock. So the entire crypto sector is feeling it, especially on the volume side. And then in turn is going to affect volatility. Those things go hand in hand. So we're dealing with extremely low volatility environments. And then we're dealing with just continued issues of everything related to Binance, Binance US, CZ. Now the DOGE is trying to go after them. The headline from Wall Street Journal yesterday was about illegal Chinese activity, and it's kind of never-ending and relentless. This is today's gem about U.S. prosecutors going after Binance, worried that they're going to cause a run on the exchange. So when we've got all of this swirling negativity, uncertainty, this had been a rumor for weeks, if not months. So it's good to finally see it at least come to light and the market being aware of it. But when you have a lack of finality of everything, when you have just this open question of what's going to happen, that's not going to help the markets. It's especially not going to help risk markets, and especially not going to help altcoins. On top of all that, of course, we've got what's going on with Curve and DeFi. And if all of these layer ones exist to basically serve things like DeFi, NFTs, etc., and we have a pillar of DeFi getting exploited or hacked, and then we're having all of these loans at risk, it's a massive, massive narrative problem. Yes, there was this glimmer of hope surrounding real world assets, but I have a hard time believing that institutions or big money is going to trust DeFi when things like this are happening to something that has been around for as long as Curve has and has really stood the test of time for the most part. So when I talk about the DeFi attack surface is huge, this is just it, right? Stuff like this happens frequently. So now we've got the community dealing with one of the founders of Curve and a bad loan, potentially bad debt, potentially toxic debt to the entire ecosystem. People having to step in, Justin Sun, Jihan, Sifu. And this article explains that it put a massive loan at risk, which could basically lead to a liquidation cascade across the board. Composability is great, interoperability is great, but when you have this risk domino effect sort of built into the ecosystem, that can lead to major, major problems. I've always said whales are bad, and this is another great example. And of course, Jihan's not going to pop out of the woodwork talking about Curve for no reason, so I'm sure there's some sort of ulterior motive here for Jihan or some importance for Curve. Who knows? But he is generally not perceived as a good actor. And this relates to the Curve founder's position. If you owe the bank $100, it's your problem. If you owe DeFi $162 million, potentially, or whatever it is, that's DeFi's problem, right? There's some possibility that he just lets the loan collapse entirely. Again, an unknown, and we're trying to he is trying to shore up the loan and OTC sales, and it goes on and on and on, and it just doesn't end, right? So again, I wouldn't expect this to be an environment where alts look good all of a sudden, or alts turn around. Even layer ones, even GameFi, anything right now. We've got exchanges in trouble. We've got DeFi in trouble. We've got negative headline after negative headline. Curve has got some help from those OTC bids. It has got some help from market makers on Binance. But now we've got the rest of the ecosystem struggling with, okay, what do? Do we basically box this debt out? I'd argue if it's truly DeFi, you have to let this play out. right? This isn't exactly DeFi if we can pick and choose and censor certain people's positions. So it's definitely an interesting experiment as to what's going on. You've got Aave talking about this. You've got Abra, which I think they've backed down from, talking about this. And there's no really good solution here, because if you're a protocol and you're dealing with this massive potential toxic debt bomb that's about to go off, you can either choose to do nothing and potentially pose an existential threat to the protocol, to everybody else's position, or you can choose to take drastic measures. So I don't envy them, but not exactly DeFi for DeFi's sake, I guess. Here's a Parsec dashboard of that position. I don't know all the mechanics of the pools or how this exactly works, but from what I can gather, there was potential for some sort of timed liquidations or TWAPs once this utilization reached 100%, which wasn't the case. There was some inflows here, Sifu. And if Curve reached a certain price level, then we were talking about liquidations at that time. And this is Aave, so Aave would have been 152 million. And I was getting reminiscence of SBF when people were saying, oh, this person has enough money, he's a crypto OG, he can afford it, he can figure it out, right? Well, it got pretty close to that liquidation, and things got pretty tenuous, to say the least. So in the moment, luckily, things are okay. People stepped in, people helped out, it's getting figured out on OTC, but definitely a very scary situation for all of these lending and borrowing protocols, which had been looking pretty good, unfortunately, on the price side of things. The lending and borrowing protocols were one of the few sectors, Comp, Curve, Aave, that actually started to look good price-wise. So just really unfortunate timing. But then we've got this issue continuous with USDC relative to Tether. And I say issue because from my vantage point, USDC is critical in the DeFi plumbing and the DeFi pipes. And if we're seeing continued redemptions of USDC, that's suggestive to me that there's a lack of demand in DeFi. So just another measure. Again, if we're talking about rates and regulations still on their way, still in the process of getting written. So that's definitely not happening anytime soon, and rates keep rising. So certainly not helping USDC, whereas Tether continues to live its best life here, making record amounts of money per quarter. So it's almost as if someone has discovered a minting bug for USDC effectively that is just redeeming this and draining it. I don't know, but it's pretty dramatic and drastic. Continues to just not look like an environment that is supportive of USDC in the ecosystem, period. So with all that being said, dominance still holding around 50%. Now you might expect maybe it's higher, but again, everything's kind of coupled. Not exactly a great situation at the moment. The good news is when this clears up, eventually, the Binance stuff gets cleaned up, the Curve stuff gets cleaned up, volatility comes back. The entire environment just becomes a much easier place to trade rather than somehow forcing a trade right now when there just isn't one, So most of the alt charts, there just isn't a good trade to be taken here. It just looks like chop suey nonsense. But for me, this is the time to look at the charts and to see, okay, what actions should you be taking when the time is right? Time strikes here. So that's dominance. It doesn't really tell you much. It's still looks bullish for Bitcoin. And then there's ETH, which continues to do not much, continues to sort of droop lower. This is a 3-day chart. And ultimately, below 1600 and this ascending triangle is, in my eyes, officially invalidated. But what you definitely don't want to see is continued bleed, continued lower lows, and even this current low that it's sitting at, you don't want to see 1825 or whatever it is break on a candle close. That's just not a good sign. That doesn't usually happen in a market where prices want to go up, regardless of staking, regardless of anything else, regardless of some ETH approval on an ETF, rumors of that. As much as I want this thing to break up from a technical perspective, until it's above 2K, we just continue to lean slowly more and more bearish. Maybe another silver lining here is this could take still quite a while to play out. So we've got maybe more time than I'm giving it credit based on how I'm drawing this, but we're cutting it to the wire for sure in volumes, just, straight down this entire time. So not a lot of volume across the board, but especially on ETH. And then if you zoom in on the daily on the very end of that triangle. Again, we're getting this, call it whatever you want. You know, it doesn't matter to me, but I'm going to treat it as though it's some sort of head and shoulders. And then you've got a head and shoulders in here. You've got just a giant mess across the board, none of which exactly is bullish in my eyes. And we keep reversing on any strength very quickly. You know, look at this chart. Almost any time we've had strength, we've quickly reversed it. The Ripple stuff, the past week, the past 2 weeks, whatever it is, we just cannot hold those highs. The bid's just getting demolished. So if we break down from this diag, it's not going to be pretty. That's my guess. That's my assumption. And here's even more zoomed in on the 4 hour. Again, every sort of fractal measurement you take of this, zoomed in, zoomed out, it just doesn't look like it wants to go up here. It definitely looks like it's having trouble holding on to highs, and it would much rather give those highs away as people are selling. You know, this is a monster of price action. It's all over the place, but it doesn't look bear. It doesn't look bullish, right? It just doesn't. So that speaks to really the entire ecosystem, not just ETH, but anything on top of ETH, any sentiment surrounding any token really has to have a very strong separate narrative going on in my eyes to compete with this, because if ETH is bearish and angry, most everything else is also going to be bearish and angry. ETH BTC hasn't done too much of anything, still, you know, bearish to neutral on this. It certainly looks as though it wants lower lows eventually. And if we zoom in on the 4 hour, you know, maybe this is worth watching in the near term if you're expecting a move one way or the other. But I can't imagine this magically pops up if Curve is in trouble, Binance is in trouble, that sort of thing. So before we talk about some more alts here, let me mention today's video sponsor, Kraken Pro. Kraken Pro is a complete overhaul of the Kraken trading experience with a one-stop shop for advanced and professional traders. Kraken Pro enables efficient trading execution across multiple markets with a UI that allows for unique optimization tailored to your trading style. And one of the reasons why I talk about Kraken Pro, loved working with them in any capacity, is because I've used Kraken for years and personally have zero concerns on the treasury side of things. You know, this isn't a Binance in my eyes, right? That's my opinion. So let's look at some of the DeFi coins here. This is the Kraken Pro UI, and they have coins separated out here by sector, which is great. I'm also selecting the USD pairs specifically. They've got other pairs, BTC pairs, ETH pairs. You can see Curve getting a ton of volume today. And like I said, there was a concern, a very real concern, that this thing spirals out of control and all of a sudden we margin call that massive loan on Aave. Even how this sits here now, it certainly doesn't look happy, but there's a potential for, say it with me, inverted head and shoulders. I know I'm Mr. Inverted Head and Shoulders, but very possible, right? What you don't want to see for Curve and DeFi's sake is this thing continuing to go lower. Now, if they're selling OTC at 40 cents or buying at 40 cents, where are they potentially selling it? Are they selling it? I don't know. You know, are they turning it around quickly and making that profit on it? I can't imagine they want to hold this if that loan explodes. Again, just massive risk reward, honestly. Very much up in the air in my eyes, not out of the woods at all. And that's why you're seeing all this volume come in on Curve. But prior to this, you know, it had looked the least strong, I guess you could say, amongst the group, Maker Comp, Aave, right? I think we were looking at levels at $1 on the daily or 3-day chart, and the cloud, again, doing what it does and keeping you out of trouble here. We haven't been above the daily cloud on Curve since April, okay? So this thing just telling you continuously, it doesn't know when something's going on, right? But it's telling you things don't look so great here on price. Maker, on the other hand, I'd say in the category of lending and borrowing, at least for me, actually looks pretty decent here. You know, it looks pretty good. If we just measure out some fibs, let's pick an arbitrary middle here, almost hitting that near-term target. But again, if we think of this as some sort of inverted head and shoulders, something, right? It doesn't have to be perfect or pretty. There was also some news about A16Z, or one of the big VCs, selling their Maker positions, which I absolutely love to see. Again, in my eyes, whales are bad. Love Michael Saylor, love what he's done. But what's his exit plan, right? What is Price going to do when he starts selling. Who's he going to sell to? What's the market gonna do when he starts selling? Is he never going to sell? I don't know. I don't. Whales make me nervous because inevitably something happens where they start to get squeezed. So anyway, I'd love to see whale selling into strength, whatever you want to think about that as. But Maker still looks okay, especially relative to Curve. And then Comp also had a similar pop up, basically back to the neckline, back to the breakout area. And right, again, not pretty, not perfect. Hard to argue it's not there. What I'm really more concerned with for these charts in the low time frames is, again, another version of ETH, which would be this head and shoulders reversal, right? Whatever you want to call it. Again, not pretty, not perfect, but until it starts to make higher highs and stops consolidating like it wants to break down, not exactly super bullish. One other thing you can do, I don't think they have alerts on here just yet, but what you can do is one thing we can do is put an order at a specific level, or if we're sure we think this is going to break down, we can measure out the fibs. Let's just conservatively say, 42, something like that, somewhere in here. But if you wanted some sort of alert, you could do that. Another thing you could do is put a trigger, but that might actually be not as helpful. So they do have alerts coming, but anyway, point is, if you want an alert, you can always put down like a minimum order of something. Not exactly the best way to do it, but one way to do it. Anyway, so Comp also doesn't look too exciting. Let's look at Aave. SNX is another one. See, now Aave to me is already broken down on lower time frames, potentially because of that risk with that loan. I can't imagine most people holding Aave are too excited about that. It does have kind of the uni chart as well, where it has this potential for a descending triangle, potential for a breakout. What does the daily cloud say? Daily cloud is kind of all over the place. Let's go to the weekly here. Weekly says it is potentially soon, maybe ready for a TK cross. So again, unfortunate for the ecosystem that this curve hack happened, because that sort of set the wheels in motion for all this other stuff. But prices had been looking pretty decent. SNX slightly better. Cloud on the daily doesn't really help you. But all of these sort of have some version of an inverted head and shoulders on higher time frames. Not exactly a massive expected move here, but certainly a change of pace from the months of down. So it's no surprise that we're seeing volumes pick up on all those. Check Uni as well. Yeah, Uni had been looking pretty decent, right, outside of the daily cloud for the first time since March. Starting to find some strength again on the weekly, also getting ready for a TK cross, and it still might cross, right? And you're going to see people on the cloud calling for pretty massive moves. To 24 would be the weekly edge to edge. I'm not going to just flat out disagree with that, but the problem is I think we would need to see in the US some sort of regulatory reassurance that they're not going to try to crush the entirety of DeFi first for prices like that to happen. So I still like a lot of this stuff because it's sat flat for so long. Even an event like this may continue to pressure the remaining capitulators out of DeFi. And that's just something to watch, right? Because on the curve chart, it hasn't really been at these lows since the beginning of the last bull run, right? Pretty sizable wick on the weekly. So that's DeFi for the most part. Balancer was another one I was kind of getting excited about last week. On the daily, doesn't look too great. So most everything in the DeFi realm pretty stressed on several salvos at this point of bad news. But as you can see, Kraken has a ton of DeFi stuff. Now if we go to the layer ones, let's just go down the list here, take a quick peek. Sol on the daily cloud, it is above the daily cloud. And once again, it's got some sort of triple bottom potential, multi-month. The bigger issue here is how much more forced selling needs to happen on assets that have been seized. I don't know. Cloud doesn't hate it though. Looks okay. I've seen a lot of chatter about Sol lately. Let's look at Ripple. Ripple also just sort of down since that initial relisting pop. This to me looks like BNB, USD does. This to me looks like a lot of stuff that eventually breaks down. It may take some time, but eventually this should break down. And on the topic of BNB, with that news today, massive move down. But again, preceding it, what do you see? You tell me. You tell me what that looks like, or am I crazy? So the market not super happy with BNB, and then if we look at the 3-day chart, it's right there at that level. I think there was also, I don't know if it's still there in DeFi or on BSC or something, there was a pretty large loan, I think at 220 with BNB. So below 220 and things may get interesting on the BNB side of things. LTC halving just happened. Let's see if we can see that in a chart. Let's zoom way out here. Nope, I can't see it. So it just happened like a few hours ago. LTC on the weekly has a chance, like a lot of these DeFi coins, to actually have a decent move up, right? So the question then becomes, will this edge-to-edge work out? How viable do we think this is? Is this worth some sort of allocation when it triggers? It's not quite in the cloud yet. It did have a halving. Does that even matter? It doesn't. Historically, the Bitcoin halving has mattered way more for Litecoin than the Litecoin halving. But this may move on the USD pair quite nicely to 230, somewhere thereabouts. But on the other pairs, against ETH or against BTC, it just may continue to bleed. I'm just not a big fan of it. As a buy and hold, ADA on the weekly, again, we're not even attempting a higher high just yet. We're still range bound. Not exactly a place where I want to step in and start accumulating. I'd wait for a weekly TK cross. At the very least, I'd wait for some sort of move into the cloud. But yes, this could see a massive move. Am I going to bank on that now? No. If I'm ever going to trade this thing, I'm going to wait until it's actually in the cloud. So the potential for that is there, but there's no guarantee. DOT, same thing. Very similar vibes to ADA. On the weekly, I'm sure it looks messy on the daily, which it does. Now it does have some version of a potential, triple bottom, much like the Solana chart. So if we're so blessed as to be able to rotate allocations around once things start to break out, that would be a very fun trading environment. Similar to Ripple, similar to Solana, DOT, right? You can see the same versions of this bottoming attempt over multiple months on many charts. This is Stellar. Stellar looks to me healthier than Ripple. And on the weekly, again, it's almost there. So if some of this stuff starts to clear up surrounding the negative headlines, we may have an eventual alt season on our hands, but that I think is going to take plenty of time to work itself out. AVAX, same thing. This cloud not really helping you here, honestly, on the daily. Just extremely messy, but some version of something, right? Maybe I'm just too optimistic on all these coins and assume that they're not going to make lower lows, but they look okay. They don't look terrible. Not exactly a place where I would want to step in, but they look okay. Somebody had asked me about Algo, and a few people asked me about a few other coins that I either can't find, am not sure that they are what the ticker says, or the things like WorldCoin, which I'm just not going to talk about. But this chart, this is nightmare fuel for the altcoin holder, because you've had a year and then some of down with no hope for a TK cross here yet. Really no hope at any retracement. I'll give you that there's a massive mean reversion potential. But if you're asking me about Algo, you're probably holding this for much higher, and you're wondering, is this thing ever going to go up again? And then for many people, it just becomes an allocation question, an opportunity question. Would I rather hold this pushing lows, or would I rather start to trade stuff that has attempted a bottom for a year and a half, right? This just doesn't look like a chart that has found a bottom yet. So for me, this is a massive avoid. Just stay away from that. Looks extremely bearish. Now, let's say we get the TK cross. Let's say we get into the cloud, right? Then it's a different thing, but we are so far away from that. I wouldn't even want to continue to monitor this thing until the rest of the ecosystem starts to pick up. Tezos, not many people talking about Tezos these days, I'll give you that. But again, much like Solana, DOT, AVAX, whoever else, there's an attempt, at the very least, at a bottom to potentially be found here. We're not quite there yet. I think the weekly is a great time frame to look at all these because you can zoom out and you can see that. No TK cross yet. 5 might be the level. I don't know. Maybe we see Litecoin at 230 and all these other edge-to-edge trades play out. How it's worked historically in post-2017 years, you'll get a lot of these on the chart, a lot of these edge-to-edge potential trades, and a percentage of them will work out, and then an extremely higher percentage of them will either just never work out or get delisted from exchanges. So definitely got to be careful on that realm. Dash, another one nobody talks about anymore. Again, you've got prices at lows here, no TK cross yet. Are we going to see Dash at 250? Maybe, but I wouldn't want to buy here personally. I know people that like buying lows. I like to buy strength, or at least a setup, before I buy charts that are like this at lows. Let's look at a few layer 2s and we'll wrap it up. Matic, not too much trading history here on Kraken, but on the daily, just doesn't. Again, the cloud is your friend here. The cloud is saying, look, now's not the time. Maybe someday, but not today. So Matic doesn't look so hot. EOS, I don't hear anybody or see anybody talking about EOS anymore. The weekly kind of looks like algo, right? Kind of looks like a little bit of Solana vibes too. Kind of attempting something. Watch list material, maybe, but I wouldn't want to try to be a hero down here, catch a knife, and then assume some sort of what percentage would this be? Okay, yeah, 1,000% move to the cloud weekly. I mean, hey, look, it might happen. I just am a big non-believer. So for me, this becomes a trade. This becomes a setup when we're actually in the cloud. Definitely a wait and see for most of the coins here. Anything else interesting on the layer 2 side of things? Not really. Gaming's not really my bag. But again, they've got a lot of stuff. Oh, Doge. Somebody wanted me to look at Doge. Doge at least looks better than most alts. This doesn't look great, right? But at least it's bottomed for, I don't know, over a year. Looks like it's getting ready to make highs, higher highs at the very least. And it's not pushing lows. It's got that on its side. The daily cloud doesn't really help you at all. And that's why I most of the time just bump up the time frame. But anyway, this looks okay. It doesn't look amazing. Nothing I would touch in the moment. For most of these coins, it's simple. It's black and white. Do they have a BlackRock ETF pending? If the answer is no, for me personally, the better allocation is the BlackRock ETF coin. So that's all for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.